of her new role, the steadfast devotion to duty on which I have come to rely so much. As my heir, William now assumes the Scottish titles which have meant so much to me. He succeeds me as Duke of Cornwall and takes on the responsibilities for the Duchy of Cornwall.
Inside the palace today, an incident unfolded that shook the entire dignity of the royal family. King Charles, who had always been seen as strong and in control, suddenly appeared powerless in front of his own wife, Queen Camilla.
I count on the loving help of my darling wife, Camilla. In recognition of her own loyal public service since our marriage 17 years ago, she becomes my Queen Consort.
Palace staff stood in shock, and Prince William stepped in to calm the situation, but by then, it was already too late. This moment didn't just rattle the palace, it sent shockwaves across the entire nation. Camilla's behavior was so harsh that people are now asking, has the time finally come for William to strip away royal titles? This is more than just a family matter. It could be the turning point that decides the future of the monarchy. Stay with us, because the real truth is about to be revealed. The day the palace shook. It was supposed to be a normal morning at Clarence House. Staff moved quietly along the hallways, carrying papers, notebooks, and the usual polite smiles that had become second nature over decades of royal life. The sun had just started spilling golden light across the marble floors, and everything seemed calm, orderly, routine. But that calm was about to shatter. At precisely 10:30, an unexpected storm erupted. Queen Camilla rose from her chair, her eyes blazing, and her voice cut through the air with the force of a whip. King Charles, the man known for his composure, suddenly froze. Those present would later describe the scene as surreal. A room full of aides, advisors, and officials, all stunned into silence by words that seemed almost impossible coming from someone who was supposed to stand beside the monarch. "She's cruel, relentless, and unafraid," whispered one aide later, recalling the moment Camilla launched into her tirade. The accusations flew fast and sharp. She accused Charles of weakness, of always siding with Prince William, of failing to assert authority where it mattered most. Every word was precise, like she had waited years for this opportunity. For Charles, the impact was immediate. His shoulders slumped, his face lost color, and for the first time in decades, a palpable vulnerability filled the room. Staff who had witnessed decades of royal protocol could not hide their shock. One palace officer later admitted, "I've seen tension before, but nothing like this." He looked as though someone had ripped the air from his lungs. Meanwhile, Prince William, who had been called in once the situation escalated, arrived too late to prevent the verbal onslaught, but not too late to take action. The moment was pivotal. William realized that this wasn't simply a personal argument. This was a signal of deeper fractures inside the palace, cracks in the very foundation of the monarchy's daily functioning. Later that evening, the first step toward accountability was taken. A detailed report of the confrontation was written, including the precise timeline, the names of witnesses, and, crucially, time-stamped audio evidence. It bypassed the usual chain of command and went straight to William's office at Kensington Palace. The message was clear. This was no ordinary family dispute. It was a problem that demanded intervention. Reading the report was a turning point for William. He had tolerated tensions in the past, maintaining a careful balance between respect for tradition.
Rumours of crisis in the marriage of the heir to the throne were fueled this summer by a book by former royal watcher Andrew Morton. It alleged deep unhappiness in the royal relationship. Serialised in the Sunday Times, the book claimed the princess was locked in a loveless marriage, hurt by her husband's continued friendship with an old flame, Camilla Parker Bowles,
and protection for his father. But this time, he felt a surge of responsibility, not just as the son of the king, but as someone who now understood the stakes. He immediately began taking action, calling meetings with trusted advisors, gathering further testimonies, and putting together a comprehensive picture of Camilla's pattern of behavior over the years. The palace, for so long bound by unwritten rules of decorum, began to shift. Staff who had once remained silent now spoke. They described a series of incidents, small at first, almost invisible, but together forming a chain of intimidation and manipulation. A former communications officer explained how even minor events had been twisted to consolidate power, creating an atmosphere of fear among those who had served the royal household faithfully. As the days passed, William's resolve hardened. He understood that this was not about revenge or personal grievances. This was about protecting the integrity of the crown, safeguarding the monarchy from behavior that threatened its dignity. Strategic decisions were made quietly, efficiently, and deliberately. Camilla's influence began to wane, almost imperceptibly at first, but the shift was undeniable. For King Charles, the experience was a revelation. Years of carefully maintained composure had not shielded him from public humiliation, even in private, but it also offered a measure of relief. His son was stepping in, acting decisively, and finally addressing what had long been ignored. In a rare private moment, Charles admitted to William the burden he had carried for decades: the shame, the helplessness, the quiet endurance. "She is not kind when no one is watching," he confided. "I tried to manage it, but I could not protect myself or the crown." That confession, simple yet profound, gave William the clarity he needed. It was permission, unspoken but absolute, to act not as a son seeking justice, but as a guardian of tradition, duty, and the monarchy itself. Within hours, strategic moves were initiated. Staff meetings were reorganized, responsibilities were realigned, and a clear message was sent to all corners of the royal household behavior that undermined the king would no longer be tolerated. By the following week, the first tangible changes were evident. Camilla's public appearances were curtailed. Key patronages and ceremonial roles were reassigned. Behind closed doors, the machinery of royal governance had been recalibrated, ensuring that power and influence aligned with loyalty and respect rather than intimidation and manipulation. For the palace staff, for Charles, and for William, the day the palace shook was not just a moment of scandal, it was a moment of reckoning. The dynamics of power, trust, and family had shifted, and the consequences would resonate through the corridors of Clarence House for years to come.
The Queen Consort has hosted a reception at Clarence House alongside King Charles in their first public appearance together.
And so the question remained in the minds of those watching closely. Could the monarchy survive the storm, or had the very heart of royal authority been irreversibly altered? Secrets within the palace and William's decision. At Clarence House, the atmosphere shifted dramatically within just a few days. The calm that used to spread across the marble floors in the mornings now carried a subtle fear, lurking behind every corridor, every room, and even behind the curtains. The staff, who had been part of royal routines for years, quietly began whispering to one another. Everyone knew something significant had happened, something only meant for inner circles, but no one dared speak aloud. William immediately realized this was not a personal feud. It was a matter of control and influence. He knew that if the power games within the palace went unchecked, it could jeopardize not just the king's reputation, but the unity of the entire family. That's why he quickly decided that action had to be taken. He began holding private meetings with his closest advisors. Every event was carefully documented, every witness questioned, and Camilla's past actions scrutinized. This wasn't a one-off incident. It was a pattern of calculated moves, leveraging palace staff through fear and manipulation. One shocking revelation was that Camilla had been subtly cultivating fear in the palace for years. Whenever a decision didn't favor her, she pressured people, threatening careers and reputations. Most astonishingly, her influence wasn't limited to the staff. It even affected King Charles himself. Charles, usually known for patience and composure, now appeared visibly burdened. The color in his face had faded, and the confidence that had defined him for decades seemed shaken. Observing this, William understood that the matter went beyond control. It was about protecting the dignity of the monarchy. He told his father, "It's time we draw clear boundaries and protect the family's legacy." Meanwhile, small signs inside the palace became significant. Letters, confidential memos, minor notes, all previously overlooked, now exposed a clear pattern of Camilla's manipulations. What once seemed trivial now revealed her influence over the palace's very foundation. William carefully planned a strategy. He wanted everyone to understand that no one could successfully undermine the king. His plan included limiting public roles, redistributing responsibilities, and increasing internal oversight to prevent any repeat of such actions. One day, while reviewing some old letters, William uncovered the full extent of the scheme. The correspondence revealed that threats and control had guided several key decisions. This confirmed it wasn't a fleeting temper. It was a long-term strategy threatening the balance of power within the palace. William decided the issue could not remain internal. He secretly met with King Charles and assured him of unwavering support. For the first time, Charles accepted his son's guidance without hesitation. This moment strengthened trust between father and son and marked the first step in addressing the palace's internal crisis. Days later, initial actions were visible. Camilla's public duties were restricted, and her influence on key decisions was reduced.
Queen Camilla has returned to royal duties after suffering a chest infection. The illness meant she was unable to attend Remembrance Day events.
Palace staff began noticing that decisions were now guided by evidence, rules, and the monarchy's interest, not personal desires. Yet one question lingered in everyone's mind. Would Camilla continue attempting to wield power within the palace? Or has the monarchy become strong enough that no one can harm it again? This question echoed in every corner of the palace, and everyone knew the answer would soon emerge. For William, this was not just a test. It was a moment to safeguard the monarchy, protect the family's reputation, and fulfill his personal duty. Everyone in the palace was tense, waiting, and aware that this was only the beginning. In the coming days, the dynamics of the royal family would shift, and long-hidden secrets within the palace would gradually come to light. The tipping point: Camilla's influence faces consequences. The days that followed William's decisive steps were anything but ordinary. Within Clarence's house, a tension unlike anything the staff had ever experienced began to ripple through the halls. It was subtle at first, the hesitant glances, the hushed whispers, the way even the most seasoned aides paused before entering a room. But William knew that the real test was only beginning. Camilla, long accustomed to unchallenged control, was not someone who accepted limits quietly. As the week unfolded, a clear pattern emerged. Staff members who had remained silent for years now began stepping forward. Each testimony, each account painted a disturbing picture. Camilla had not only undermined the king, but had also attempted to manipulate key palace operations in her favor. From petty confrontations to deliberate disruptions of events benefiting Prince William and Catherine, a pattern of intimidation became undeniable. Every detail, carefully documented by William and his team, revealed that this was no isolated incident. It was a systematic attempt to control the monarchy from behind the scenes. Meanwhile, King Charles remained a silent observer, his confidence slowly returning. There was a newfound clarity in his eyes, a sense that for the first time in decades, the direction of the crown was in capable hands. He trusted William's judgment implicitly, and William, understanding the weight of his responsibility, moved with precision. He wasn't seeking revenge, he was safeguarding the crown, the family, and the very legacy of the monarchy. But Camilla's reaction was immediate and striking. She refused to acknowledge the restrictions placed on her public roles. Every attempt to enforce boundaries was met with resistance. Staff reported tense encounters, sharp words, and moments where even the most composed palace aides felt a pang of fear. Yet William remained steadfast, methodically documenting each incident, ensuring that nothing could be disputed later. One particularly revealing day, a former royal scheduler came forward with a detailed account of an event from 2 years prior. Camilla had publicly humiliated staff during a coronation rehearsal, berating them for minor errors and claiming that the monarchy owed its stability to her guidance alone. The report, time-stamped and corroborated by multiple witnesses, added weight to William's ongoing review. It became evident that this behavior was not spontaneous. It was habitual, and over time, it had eroded trust within the palace. William knew that this was the tipping point. The monarchy could not survive under the strain of unchecked influence, and Charles could no longer risk being undermined in front of the entire institution. Carefully, he arranged a private session with senior advisors, presenting all collected evidence. Every recording, every witness statement, every documented incident laid out a clear narrative. Camilla's power had crossed the line, and immediate measures were required. The moment the council convened, the gravity of the situation became clear. Silence filled the room as William outlined the documented patterns of behavior. The advisors, initially hesitant, could no longer deny the facts. The room felt as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, knowing that history was about to be made. William's words cut through the tension with clarity and resolve. The monarchy could no longer allow personal agendas to threaten its stability. By the end of the meeting, a consensus emerged. Camilla's influence needed to be formally curtailed. For the first time, the staff witnessed a decisive action against someone who had long been considered untouchable. The ripple effect was immediate. Restrictions on her roles, responsibilities, and public appearances were enacted. Key patronages were reassigned, and her presence at high-profile events became increasingly limited. It was not a public scandal, but a quiet, methodical correction of power within the palace. Even with these actions, a question lingered. How would the royal family navigate the fallout, and could the monarchy remain united with such a public reshaping of authority? The tension was palpable. Staff members watched as Charles regained his composure, but the weight of years of unspoken stress and manipulation was visible in his eyes. William, however, remained resolute, guiding each decision with unwavering focus. He understood that leadership required more than authority. It demanded clarity, accountability, and courage. Meanwhile, Camilla's response became increasingly unpredictable. Reports surfaced of private meetings where she attempted to influence decisions indirectly, testing boundaries and probing weaknesses. But William's preparations were thorough. He had ensured that every move she could make was monitored, and the palace staff were clear on the new protocols. The monarchy was no longer vulnerable to hidden manipulations. By midweek, the palace had begun adjusting to the new reality. Staff members who had feared repercussions were now speaking freely, creating a transparent environment that had not existed for decades. The shift in power was subtle, but undeniable. Camilla's authority had diminished, while William and Charles worked in unison to restore order. Each day, as small victories were achieved, the monarchy grew stronger, more resilient, and more respected within its walls. And still, one question remained at the forefront of everyone's mind. Would Camilla attempt to reclaim her influence, or had the palace finally reached a point where the monarchy's integrity could no longer be challenged? The answer would soon unfold, but one thing was certain: this chapter marked a turning point. The palace had witnessed the first true exercise of accountability at the highest level, and it would change the royal family forever. As the week drew to a close, a quiet tension settled over Clarence House. It was no longer chaos, but a tense calm, a sense that the palace had survived a storm and emerged stronger. William's actions had not only protected his father, but had also set a precedent for the future. The monarchy would endure, not through fear, but through courage, clarity, and principled leadership. the final move securing the crown's integrity. The palace had barely caught its breath after William's decisive measures when the next phase began. Tension lingered like a shadow over the corridors of Clarence House. Every portrait, every ornate frame seemed to watch silently as the stakes of power shifted. Camilla's subtle resistance had not gone unnoticed, but William and Charles knew that a single misstep now could undo weeks of careful strategy. Charles, now fully aware of the gravity of the threat, made his presence known. Quiet but firm, he addressed the senior staff personally, reinforcing the boundaries and clarifying expectations. There was no room for ambiguity. Loyalty to the crown came before all personal agendas. The message was clear. Any attempt to undermine the monarchy, no matter who, would be met with swift consequences. Camilla, sensing her influence waning, tested boundaries one last time. Yet, every move she made was anticipated, every word countered with precision. William's foresight had created a safety net that even Camilla could not escape. Her once subtle manipulations now faltered under scrutiny, and the palace staff, emboldened by transparency, refused to be intimidated. It was a delicate chess game, and William was several moves ahead. Finally, the decisive action came. Charles, with quiet authority, restructured Camilla's official responsibilities, effectively stripping her of powers that had allowed subtle interference in palace affairs. Public appearances were curtailed, key ceremonial duties reassigned, and her influence over internal decisions systematically limited. The palace, once a theater of behind-the-scenes tension, began breathing again. Order was restored not through chaos, but through calculated, deliberate leadership. And in that moment, the monarchy made a statement. Respect and accountability would no longer be optional. The balance of power was clear, and the message resonated beyond the palace walls. Yet, as the dust settled, one question remained for the public to ponder. Could the crown remain untarnished despite internal battles, or would history repeat itself if vigilance waned? For William and Charles, the answer was simple. They would never allow the integrity of the monarchy to be compromised again. As the palace doors closed on this chapter, the royal family emerged stronger, united, and unshaken. And for those watching this saga unfold, remember true courage is measured not by moments of comfort, but by the bold steps taken when everything is at stake. If you want to witness more secrets, shocking revelations, and untold stories from the royal halls, make sure you don't miss what comes next. Hit that subscribe like button and stay tuned for every revelation.